This is the flight to Sandown, following the 5-hour inspection I've already videoed, and like the previous 5 hours flown, it's mainly about monitoring the engine's performance. These are the engine readings after a few minutes warm up as I leave my parking spot. The taxi from my parking area to runway 20 is not far short of a mile, and here I'm approaching the Alpha 2 hold for runway 20, where you can see I'm only using about 800 revs to taxi on the smooth concrete. Any more power taxiing and I would be constantly using my brakes to keep the speed down. After takeoff and 5 minutes flying, the temperatures and pressures are perfect. This flight was made during the July heatwave with fantastic visibility. As I drove to North Weald, I heard on my car radio that there was an incident on the QE2 bridge. You can see the traffic gridlock going towards the M25 on the A127. A bit further along, passing the Alcid interchange on the A13, the traffic is just as bad. Well into Kent now, and the engine readings are just the same as I pass over Tunbridge Wells. Once level at 2,000 feet, after leaving North Weald I was able to fly hands-free for most of the journey, which is unusual at this level, especially when it's so hot. I like to fly south from Tunbridge using Buell Water as a reference, which minimises the chances of accidentally entering the Gatwick 1500 to 2500 CTA. Cutting that corner only saves a few minutes anyway. As I approach Brighton, I'm just below 4,000 feet using 2,600 revs, which is giving me an airspeed of 100 knots with the temperatures and pressures exactly the same as they have been. At 4,000 feet there's a good view of the marina at Brighton, as well as a unique U-shaped Brighton racecourse seen in the foreground. Unless weather dictates, 4,000 feet can be maintained all the way to the Solent, where I normally fly towards Portsmouth, then across the Solent at the shorter crossing than directly from Chelsea. I've circled and inserted 2 still photos of Brighton's Palace Pier and what's left of the West Pier. I took the West Pier photos some years ago. Today there's even less of it remaining. I requested a basic service from Shoreham as there were a couple of light aircraft tracking the coastline flying at my level. Shoreham Air Traffic Controller asked me to report south of Beam the power station chimney as I flew west. Due to a military exercise involving 8 fast moving jets, I needed to stay above 2,000 feet until midway across the Solent, so I decided to remain at 4,000 feet and fly the longer crossing direct from Chelsea to Sandown. The Sky Demon chart shows the temporary restricted airspace from the surface to 2,000 feet. The jets will be flying along the mainland side of the Solent, then turning south to leave the coast at Chelsea Bill, crossing under my flight path as shown on the inset chart. This arrow shows the approximate track the jets would fly 2,000 feet below me. I'm now well over halfway across the Solent from Chelsea, and Sandown have given runway 23 to land on, so I intend doing a low power dead side join from the south, keeping roughly on this heading. Interesting bank of low clouds with what looks like a Stena car ferry underneath it. I turned the camera off shortly to concentrate on the landing and also keep an eye on what looked like a thick bank of low cloud to the west of the airfield. As the wind was blowing from the west, I was concerned it might roll in by the time I positioned for landing. It didn't, must have risen and dispersed as it passed over the high west end of the island. Here I am after a surprisingly lively landing. They parked me up next to the mobile bar, which unfortunately wasn't open. It looks like these two aircraft may also have had problems landing. I felt especially sorry for the French Cessna, as it must have been a pain getting back to France. Rather than fly to an airfield, land, have food, then fly back to your base airfield, I think it's nice to explore the areas around the airfields. This often means accommodation of some sort, which obviously adds to the cost of any excursions. At Sandown there's always the option of camping on the field, but my camping days are well behind me. By the time I paid my landing and parking fees, had a drink and returned to the aircraft, a pilot in a Renegade had arrived, tied his aircraft down and pitched his tent under the wing. That's him in the distance. Luckily I'd managed to get a good deal for a room at the Premier Inn for a couple of nights, which is only a short walk from the airport. I've marked the positions of the airport, Premier Inn and Lake Station on this Google Earth map, and you can see the various options for food. The KFC photo was actually taken from my room. The Merry Gardens pub opposite serves food all day, and there's an Aldi 2 minutes away from the Premier Inn. You can always eat at the airport because the food is excellent. Now, I had a quiche and a bottle of cider to wash it down with when I arrived. As I had 2 full days on the Isle of Wight, I've made 2 videos, one of the outbound flight with the first day's exploring, and a second video on day 2 including the return flight to North Weald. The first day's outing started here at the Premier Inn after an excellent breakfast that set me up for the day. It took me about 15 minutes to walk to Lake Station along a busy road, only to find I had just missed the train into Ryde, and being a single track line, the next train was travelling in the wrong direction towards Shanklin. Rather than stand on a deserted Lake Station in the hot sun where there were no seats, I decided to board the train to Shanklin and stay on it for the return journey to Ryde at the other end of the line. Here I am on the train at Shanklin for the 15-minute wait before it leaves to go back to Ryde Pierhead at the opposite end of the line. After Ryde Esplanade Station, the train continues a short distance down the pier to the pierhead. The hovercraft terminal was a short walk through the station, then over the footbridge. This short clip of the hovercraft terminal was taken from on top of the footbridge. The terminal building inside was very clean, well organised and air conditioned. The video of the actual crossing to Southsea was a bit of a disappointment due to the dirty windows on this hovercraft. The sea was calm and the crossing was smooth, with very little feeling of speed unless passing near another object like the navigation buoys. Once I disembarked, I walked to where I could get a good view of the hovercraft starting its 10-minute return flight to Ryde. This video clip shows the versatility of the hovercraft, starting from a concrete surface, passing seamlessly over sand, uneven shingle and then onto the water. I'm standing on the edge of Clarence Pier taking this video. Clarence Pier being one of 2 piers in Southsea, the other being South Parade Pier further along the coast to the east. South Parade Pier is a traditionally built British pier projecting out to sea away from the beach, whereas Clarence Pier was constructed parallel to the beach, partly on the land. You can see the difference of the two piers in my two aerial photographs. From Clarence Pier there's a walkway along the water's edge that leads into Old Portsmouth, passing various fortifications along the way. This building is the Square Tower. The church with the missing roof is the Royal Garrison Church, originally used as a hospital for pilgrims travelling to Canterbury, Chichester and Winchester. Although it's been restored over the years, the roof was never replaced. Old Portsmouth developed from a small medieval port into one of Britain's most important naval towns, and though many individual buildings have been replaced or restored, as you can see as I walk along the narrow streets, much of its medieval street pattern survives today. After passing the 15th century Square Tower, this is generally not open to the public. Further along the harbour entrance is the Round Tower, which was constructed in 1418 to defend the harbour entrance. During the reign of Henry VIII, there would have been a large chain stretching across the harbour entrance, which was attached to a capstan immediately behind the Round Tower, which tightened or slackened the chain. When raised, this chain would slow down hostile ships enough for the guns of the Round Tower and Fort Blockhouse on the opposite side at Gosport to fire on them. As I walk along the streets towards Spice Island, I can imagine what it was like when these streets were lined with old timber frame buildings. Apparently in the 18th century the area was packed with taverns, lodging houses, brothels and sailors on leave. This made Spice Island an ideal hunting ground for the press gangs, seizing men from pubs or the waterfront and taking them to waiting guard ships in Portsmouth Harbour. Contrary to popular belief, the press gangs were quite selective in who they took, looking for men with maritime skills such as fishermen, merchant sailors and dock workers. As Portsmouth was the Royal Navy's main dockyard, it meant demand for crews was constant during wartime, so press gangs were particularly active then. This timber-clad building is probably typical of the type of buildings that have long since gone. The boat circled is the Portsmouth to Gosport ferry, which you can take to visit the Submarine Museum in Gosport. A short walk from Spice Island and I'm at the train station, which is connected to the passenger ferry, where I'm going to take the catamaran back to Ryde Pierhead rather than walk to the Hoverport terminal in Southsea. Opposite the station entrance you can see HMS Warrior, which is an exhibit in the Portsmouth Historic Dockyard, and it's unique in being powered by both steam and sail, being the first of two iron-hulled armoured plated warships in Queen Victoria's Navy. The two funnels are retractable when the steam engines are not being used to allow for maximum sail to be set. I would have visited the naval dockyard, but to do it justice it needs about 4 hours and it was very hot. It's a 4 days outing combined with a visit to the Submarine Museum in Gosport, so I boarded the catamaran for the 20-minute journey back to Ryde. This is the area of Old Portsmouth I walked through earlier. From the seaside there is a good view of the round tower where the chain used to be fixed across the harbour entrance. The chain would have been about where we are now. I've inserted an aerial photograph of Portsmouth I took some years ago. The catamaran averages about 15 knots for the 20-minute crossing.
We will be arriving at our terminal shortly. For your safety, passengers are to take a seat and remain seated until the vessel is safely berthed and you're called forward by a crew member.
I don't think anybody that was standing went and got a seat as instructed. Disembarking at Ryde Pierhead was relatively speedy, but I think that was only because the boat was only about a quarter full. This is the pickup area where you can collect passengers off the ferry. Ryde Pierhead Station is at the opposite end of the island to Shanklin. Up until early 1966, trains went on to Ventnor, with the last steam train service operating later that year, after which time the line was electrified using ex-London Underground tube trains. I'm sadly old enough to have ridden on the steam service to Ventnor as a young boy during a family holiday. Rather than take the train from the pierhead, I walked the length of the pier to the hoverport to get a video of a hovercraft coming into land. Yes, they use the term land as a journey on a hovercraft is referred to as a flight for various traditional and operational reasons, even though it's only 1.5 meters above the surface. It was low tide when I took this video, which again demonstrates how versatile the hovercraft is. On my last visit, these two military hovercraft were parked up near the hovercraft terminal. This is my train back to Lake. Brading Station, 2 stops from Lake. There's a very interesting Roman villa within walking distance of the station. When I got off the train at Lake Station, I strolled a few hundred yards to this cliff-top walk. There was access to the beach, but I'd had enough exercise for the day and still had to walk back to the Premier Inn. This is the end of the first day's outing, and as I said earlier, the second day's outing is on a separate video along with the return flight to North Weald.